I'm Dominic Sorrentino, Business Development Manager in the Education segment for Motorola Solutions. And today we're going to talk about government stimulus funding for education for K-12, public and private, as well as for higher education, public and private. We're going to talk about ways that you can help your customers, and for those customers that are with us today, how the funding works if you haven't been introduced to it. We're going to specifically be talking about the ESSER funding and the higher education and the governor's emergency relief funding under the three bills. First, starting with CARES Act, and then secondly, with the COVID relief package that was signed into law in December of 2020, and then the American Rescue Plan signed into law in March of 2021, just 2 months ago. And you see on the top level, the amounts of money that were awarded to education total, ranging from $30.7 billion through $82 billion in December, and $168 billion in March. And the breakdowns by levels, K-12 from 13.2 in the first bill through 54 billion to 122 billion. So we're going to break these down in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. So in the second relief package, which was the Supplemental Appropriations Act, it was signed in law on December 27th specifically, and monies became allocated in January to the state education agencies from the U.S. Department of Education, started with approximately $82 billion, with $4 billion of it going to the governor's emergency education relief fund. That's nationally. $54 billion to ESSER 2. ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. And that was the second bill, so thus the two. $23 billion for here, higher education emergency relief, number 2, and the $819 million to the Bureau of Indian Education. Under the governor's emergency education relief, $2.7 billion had to be allocated to private schools. And then $1.3 billion was at the discretion of the governor for education. That was the second allocation after the first CARES Act. The third bill, the American Rescue Plan Act, has several differences. One is it's more than double the amount of money that's going to education. It starts at $168 billion, broken down by $2.7 billion for the governor's emergency relief. And all of that must go to private education. The governor doesn't have any other monies that he can use for, or she use for their own discretion in education. It all must go to private schools. $122 billion under ESSER 3 goes to elementary and secondary schools. That includes public, private, and charter schools. And $40 billion to higher education. Under here 3, half of that money must go to financial aid programs for higher ed. And that's because enrollment had been decreasing and they want to fund the tuitions to get students back in class. And then the other $20 billion can be used for the allowable uses, which we'll talk about in a moment. So this money that was signed into law under the bill, the American Rescue Plan Act, began to flow to the districts and to higher ed institutions in April, so just last month. And $80 billion of it has already been distributed out to state education agencies. Now, we've talked about how much money and where it's going at a high level. Now we'll talk about what are the allowable uses of the funds. And more specifically, how Motorola Solutions products, software and hardware, fall under the allowable uses. So under ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, The bill lays out 12 allowable uses for education. Motorola Solutions qualifies under 4 of them. And the 4 that are actually written into the bill are preparedness and response efforts, facility repairs and improvements, providing resources necessary, and to develop and implement procedures. This language is from the bills. So number 3 is the most general of these 4, to provide principals and other school leaders with the resources necessary to address the needs of their individual schools. Preparedness and response efforts, coordination of preparedness and response of efforts of local education agencies to improve coordinated responses among such entities to prevent, prepare, and respond to coronavirus. And then facility repairs and improvements. The thing to understand here is that we know we're not doing school facility repairs with our technology, but we are enabling operations to reduce risk of virus transmission and exposure to environmental health hazards. And I'll show you that in the upcoming slides. And then to develop and implement procedures to continue to improve. So implement procedures and systems to improve preparedness. So in each of the states' certification of agreement, they have signed a U.S. Department of Education document agreeing to what that they are agreeing to the allowable uses, to the 12 allowable uses. Under the higher education emergency relief, here 3, it's simply 1 allowable use, which are evidence-based principles. And these are the principles laid out by the CDC. And those same principles apply to the governor's emergency education relief funds. So evidence-based principles, we'll speak to that now. So we're going to go to COVID-19 response technologies that we have developed. So when COVID-19 was first recognized as a potential pandemic, Motorola Solutions began to quickly engineer technologies to help prevent the spread of the virus. And one of them was occupancy counting technology. So this is an edge-based video analytic that detects when a person crosses an entry or exit point. And you may have seen this deployed, whereas there's monitors or tablets that are put in the facility and at entranceways and exits that shows how many people have been detected by the analytic and displays the number of people on it, or not just the monitor, but it also displays them in our dashboards, which are available to be seen through our Avigilon cloud service. A second of the response technologies is the no face mask detection. As you can see in these 2 pictures, it can detect whether there is a mask on or no mask. And the edge-based analytic will send automated alerts through Avigilon Control Center to either radio alert or orchestrate, which is the platform that integrates with our communication solutions, with the Motorola radio and network solutions. So, and to the Avigilon Mobile 3 mobile app. So subsequently, if there are numbers of people who aren't wearing masks, the information will be distributed out to anyone with a radio who would be able to respond for whatever reason people aren't complying and attend to the issue. At the dispatch level or at the control center level, you can even use Avigilon appearance search technology, which is the capability of being able to use the attributes such as adult male, dark hair, gray shirt, if you could see their pants, the color of their pants, and then by searching under those attributes, you could find this individual detected on any camera and every camera on the network. So if they've continued to walk around a campus or walk through a school, you'd be able to find out where they are and where they've been and who actually they may have encountered along the way. So I'm going to stay with those two COVID-19 response technologies for purpose of this presentation today. But this is what the dashboard looks like. You log into the Avigilon cloud services, you go to the dashboards, and you can see, for instance, this one being the last 24 hours of occupancy counting, or you can look at it over a longer period of time by the hour and get more detail. Now, one of the analytics that I didn't show you includes social distancing. So if you had social distancing violations, you'd be able to tell them on the dashboard also, along with people without masks and the occupancy counting. And because this is in a cloud, all the administrators who have credentials have the capability of, without a client, of logging in, seeing how you're performing to compliance, and then from a management level, determine if you need to make improvements. And this tool right here is a way to show that you have implemented evidence-based practices and that you are able to monitor and then make improvements to your program. So the 4 allowable uses are addressed within the last few slides that I've just presented to you. So now we've gone from the amount of money by school level, whether it's elementary and secondary school or higher ed, now to through the allowable uses. And now we'll go to what is the process for the contractor, the integrator, and for the schools to get their money. So the federal government has allocated non-competitive grant funds to the state education agencies. So to the State Board of Education, if you will. A non-competitive grant is an entitlement. It's an entitlement to a district that no other district or state agency can take from them, regardless of whether they have spent it or not, as long as they haven't exceeded the timelines that have been put into these programs under these bills. So for instance, if school district A has been allocated $10 million and school district B has been allocated $10 million, and one of them has used up all of their funds, but they still want to do another project, they can't take it from another district or from a higher education institution. They can only use the funds that are allocated to them and no one else can take them. And they are allocated according to a US federal formula called Title I, Part A. It's not a state formula. It's uniform. Every school district and every state agency knows what the formula is. And it's largely around the economic condition of the district or the school. So a more affluent district gets less money per student than a more economically challenged district. And they base that upon how many students are getting free or reduced cost lunches. So the states had submitted up to the US Department of Education the allocations they wanted provided to each of their districts. And as long as they allocated it according to the federal formula of Title I, Part A, the US Department of Education allocated to them, gave them the money to begin to allocate it to the district. Now, the district, which is also called the local education agency, has then going to be charged 10% by the state for every one of the grants that they submit. So if they have a $1 million grant approved, they're going to pay $100,000 in admin fees. Now, I'd like you to know that most states are reinvesting those admin fees back into their schools. So they're investing in improvements of communication, learning platforms, internet, and therefore the grant money is even more effective at the local level. So the state education agency has given the documents to all of the districts in their state, and the application process is then been put out in standard detail to every district in every state in the United States. So everyone's doing it one way. So that gives the state education agency a great level of scale. Everyone doing things one way is very conducive to a process that you can get through quickly. So the local education agency submits a project scope with budget details on their grant application. The grant application is normally about 2 or 3 pages in under ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. The importance for Convergint and your role in this process is to give a detailed project scope, just as you normally would, including a project timeline and the budgetary numbers to your potential customer or to your customer that is going to apply for the grant to the state education agency. The timelines will be important because that will have an effect on how frequently the allocations are made to the district from the state. The documents that are given to the districts include the worksheets that they need to fill out. So it is a pretty clear process that you'll be helping your customer, or if you're with the school and on this call and in this meeting, if you haven't seen the documents and you would like access to them and don't know who to ask, please feel free to request help from me. I'll be glad to help. So the idea is to prepare and sustain a safe learning environment on site and remote. So even private LTE falls under the allowable uses. So in other words, if remote learning is a requirement of certain students for various reasons, a district could pay through these grants to improve their connectivity to homes. So with that known, the state education agencies get the grant request from the local agency. They approve the budget. They distribute funds to the districts according to the federal formula, and then they approve the contractor cost statements in an audit process. The audit process normally occurs one time per quarter. That's the norm. The state education agencies will audit the local education agencies, the districts, one time per quarter, and the U.S. Department of Education will audit them one time per quarter. If you are on this call and you are an employee of Convergint, one thing I'd urge you to ask your customer, your school district, is how will the state allocate the funds to the district? Because there's 4 different ways. And again, I invite you to talk to me about that after this, if you'd like, as to what they are and how it could have an impact on your business and your customer. So that is the grant process. Now the timelines. I'm going to ask that we look more at the second and third relief bills, because the CARES Act and ESSER is going to expire. The application eligibility is going to expire in just about 5 or 6 weeks, June 30th of 2021. Now, so we'll go down to ESSER 2. The state education agencies must receive the applications from the districts no later than January of 2022. So if the district wants to do a project, have a project done to purchase equipment, goods or services, they have to submit their application not later than January of 2022. Keep in mind, a district is is definitely going to be submitting multiple grant requests during this period of time because they have many different departments. So from the time the grant is approved and they get the money, the district gets the money, they have 12 months to obligate it. 12 months to spend it. And they must obligate it no later than September 30th of 2024. So obligation means that if a grant was approved for $1 million and they have a contractual agreement with you, Convergint, to complete a project under that grant, that's an obligation. They don't have to spend it all because your project may extend past September 30th, 2024, but at least it was obligated. So that gives the capability for the district to implement a strategic project. But from the time they get the money, they have this long, all the way to September 30th, 2024, to obligate it. And then under the American Rescue Plan Act, ESSER 3, which is a section under ARPA, they have up until April of 2022, that's April 30th of 2022, to submit their applications for their grants. And then they will have until September 30th of 2024 to obligate the funds. Any funds that are not obligated by the end of the amendment period will go back to the federal government. It doesn't go to the state, it goes to the federal government. So they're going to want to use their money. The Tidings Amendment is not in the ESSER section. It's a separate amendment from Senator Tidings, which extends the period of time of obligation by 12 months for these two bills, ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. So with that, going through the amount of money, the allowable uses, what is the process and what are the timelines, I'm now going to open the floor up to any questions and discussion.
Yes, great job, Dominic. A couple questions here. One being, has capitalization been an issue during COVID-19 in this regard?
Did you say capitalization?
Yes, sir.
So I'm suspect you mean, are capital projects being done with the grant money?
Could be, yes.
Or are people talking about, using the money for other than the allowable uses? Because if the question is to use the money for other than allowable uses, under the American Rescue Plan and under the supplemental bill, that is forbidden. In the first bill, the CARES Act, that may have occurred because, for instance, in the state of New York used the ESSER funds to balance budgets in the schools. And so in the second and third act, they prevent that from happening. But capital projects could be done, if that's what is meant by the question, under the second and third bill. And if that is not answering the question, I'd be glad to take it offline, or so you could submit the question more specifically before we hang up.
Okay, we'll move on to a couple other ones here, very comparable to some of the ones we had this morning. What about preferences in terms of procurement options, right? I know buy board was mentioned, TIMS, et cetera. Any preferences in regarding procurement options?
No. In fact, one of the, I think, wonderful parts of these bills is that they are not telling the districts or the higher education institutions to do business differently. If they're not, there is no provision that says what type of product, not even that it's made in America. That's not even a provision. The only provision is that to implement practices, processes, and solutions at a high standard, whether on site or remote, for public and private learning. And there isn't any mandate on product. There also isn't any requirement of matching funds. So if $1 million has been allocated and they want to apply for $1 million grant, they don't have to put up $500,000 to get $500,000 or put up $1 million to get $1 million. No matching is required. And no change. If the process of the district is to go to bid for anything over, say, $100,000 or $250,000, that process is not adjusted whatsoever. It's not impeded whatsoever. If school districts want to buy off of contracts, because that's how they always buy, they can do that with their grant funds.
Fantastic. That is all we have right now for questions, Dominic. Fantastic job.
Wonderful. Thank you. If there's any questions that come to mind following this, everyone, please let me know. I will be glad to help. And thank you very much for joining us today. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.